A critical part of Stardew Valley is making money, so you can afford those gifts for not Haley. Do not gift Haley with anything more valuable than a piece of trash. But you know, you can buy your crops, you can buy your fishing rod, you can do so much stuff with it. So here are my favorite ways to make all the gold you need to buy anything you want. Enjoy. This is probably the biggest source of my money in Stardew Valley, and that is wine. So there's a few components to wine, and this is how I personally do it. There are other ways you can do it, but I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but it's the way I do it, and I've had good success with it. So the first thing you need is just a large field of crops. I normally go with ancient fruit because once you find one, it just kind of spirals. You just harvest it, seed maker it, continue planting, and you can get a massive field really quickly. You obviously want to automate it with sprinklers because if you're using ancient fruit wine, you're probably pretty late in the game, so you can afford that. After that, I normally build a bunch of sheds and fill them all with kegs. Kegs are kind of expensive to make at first. You need oak resin, copper, iron, and a bunch of wood, which is pretty pricey. Well, oak resin isn't really hard to get, just kind of annoying. That's why I normally prepare my oak resin long before I actually start doing this method, because otherwise I'm completely limited by that. So set up your oak resin early, then later on to get iron and copper, you can just buy coal, iron, and copper from Clint, and then you can go ahead and smelt that all. It is kind of expensive, and this does take a decent bit of money to set up, but it makes its money back really quickly, so you don't really have to worry about that. Obviously, after that, you just harvest a bunch of ancient fruit, put it in the wine, and then sell it. You do, of course, need the artisan perk. The artisan perk is a perk you unlock after the perk that allows crops to sell for 10% more, and it boosts the price of artisan goods by 40%, which is insanely overpowered. This makes the method insanely more effective. I'd say roughly 40%. Crazy math, I know. Fun fact, it actually used to be 50%, but ConcernedApe nerfed it in the 1.1 update since it was just a tiny bit too overpowered. It still is kind of overpowered, but I think it's still pretty reasonable now. And yes, I'm only saying that because I abuse it. Also, I want to address whether or not you should be aging wine. So when you upgrade your house to the final tier, it's pretty expensive, costs a couple 100,000 gold. You unlock a cellar where you can put casks and age wine to make them worth more. You can age it to silver quality, gold quality, and iridium quality. Silver quality increases the price by 1.25, gold quality is 1.5, and iridium is 2, meaning the wine is 1.25% more expensive, 1.5 times more expensive, and 2 times more expensive respectively. However, it takes a long amount of time to age these, so most of the time it's actually not worth it. I do sometimes age wine just because it's kind of fun. I like selling huge amounts of wine because it makes a massive amount of money on the selling screen, but it's not worth it if you're going for a purely money in X period of time. Next, I want to address which crops you should be putting into the keg. So basically what a keg does is it 3x's the initial value of the fruit. Oh yeah, and kind of off topic, but 140% of my viewers are actually subscribed, so keep subscribing, I guess. Don't worry, there's something in it for you. If I hit 60k by the end of the month, I'll change my profile picture to this image for a week. If that's not all the incentive you need, I don't know what else will convince you. So if you have a fruit that's worth 100 gold and you put it into a keg, after it processes, you will get a wine that is worth 300 gold. So with that being said, you obviously don't want to put in very cheap crops like a parsnip, because if I hadn't mentioned it before, it takes a week to process something in a keg. So you want to put in valuable crops like ancient fruit, star fruit, and we would do sweet gem berries if it was possible. Unfortunately, you cannot put sweet gem berries into kegs because that would just give you like a $10,000 wine, and that's stupid strong. A general rule of thumb is put the valuable crops into the wine and the cheap crops into the jar, because a jar only takes 2 to 3 days. One last thing I want to mention is that if you don't have enough sheds to store all the kegs you want, you can actually store it in a few different places. You can use a barn, which can be cheaper than a shed, a deluxe barn, you can build in some extra cabins and put them in there, or you can use the quarry. You can fit a whopping 374 kegs in the quarry. You can also use the bus tunnel to the left of the bus station and the road outside of the bus tunnel. So you don't have to use sheds. I normally just keep it there for ease of harvesting and putting crops back in. And going back to the previous rule of thumb, let's move into jars. Jars are basically the same as wine, except you can get a lot more of them early game because they're a lot cheaper to make. They cost 8 coal, 40 stone, and 40 wood, which I admit is pretty pricey, but you make back your money almost immediately since that's only around 2,000 gold worth of materials from Clint in year 1. So if you buy a bunch of them in year 1, that's only like 4 or 5 gems before you make back your money, and then it's just pure profit from there. I would definitely recommend doing jars early game and transitioning to kegs later game, because you'll probably be getting more valuable crops, so it's more worth it to put it in the kegs than the jars. And of course, the rule of thumb is you want to put cheaper crops into the jars, but you can still put expensive crops in if you don't have kegs. You just want to prioritize kegs over jars. So basically, generally, fill your kegs first if you have kegs and jars, and then use your remaining crops to fill the jars. Both are really good, but I generally just prefer kegs since I don't have to check them as often, and I'm kind of forgetful, so if I forget about my kegs, it's kind of a bit of a waste of time, but if I forget about my jars, it's not the end of the world. The next money method I use is generally a pretty late game method because it is super expensive to set up. Basically, the method is pigs. So pigs are pretty much the end game of animals. You start out with chickens, then you upgrade to ducks, then cows, then goats, etc. And then the final barn animal is a pig. Basically, pigs cost 18,000 gold each and produce a truffle. A truffle is a little thing that can spawn on the ground and sells for roughly 1,000 gold. Let's just round to 1,000 gold for simplicity's sake. However, you need a max upgraded barn, which costs around 100,000 gold and a couple thousand of stone and wood, so it's not cheap to make. But when you set it up, it's super strong. Like on one save, I had set up almost 12 or 14 barns all the way up to max level and filled them with pigs. It costed me hundreds of thousands of gold and probably millions to place all the pigs, and it was super annoying to fill every barn with pigs, but once I got it down and remembered to feed them, it made super good money. Another issue is that they're super expensive to feed because they go through hay unbelievably quickly. So you need to have down multiple silos and be constantly buying hay from Marnie. However, if you're forgetful like me, you often forget to restock the silos, so your animals end up starving for a while, which isn't optimal, but it still sometimes works. Because pigs do produce truffles even when they aren't fed, they just produce less. However, once you do get your pigs up and running and you remember to feed them and you have every barn built, the initial huge cost is out of the way and paid off. It's just pure profit from there. And it's good profit. They make large amounts of money since each truffle is worth 1,000 gold by default. Then you can pop it into a truffle maker, which you can make from slime and hardwood. Again, pretty expensive. It's annoying that it costs hardwood, but it's not the end of the world. And that ups the price of the truffle all the way up to 1,400 gold, which is super good. You can make upwards of hundreds of thousands of gold, even millions of gold per week with this strategy, but it does take a lot of setup. I would recommend bringing a friend into the game so you can build and upgrade multiple barns at once. Basically, if you just both open the menu at the exact same time and build and upgrade when you're inside the menu, Robin can actually build multiple things at once. You can get a ton of your friends in and mass upgrade the barns. It'll make everything go by so much quicker. So this is an endgame strategy. I obviously wouldn't recommend it early game. However, I would recommend animals early game, and that's our next point. So I said early game, but I wouldn't necessarily say early game. I more so mean mid game. I think mid game is a better way to describe it, because animals do take a little bit of money to set up. So if you don't have that money early game, I would probably say go crops instead, because less setup and you get the money quicker. But artisan goods from animals like milk, cheese, etc. is amazing because it sells for a lot of money and is affected by the 40% boost sell price. So once you have a bustling city of animals set up with a coop and a barn, pretty decently high level, and you get those auto collectors down, they do cost 25k gold, but you make back your money pretty quickly, so they're definitely worth it because it saves you a ton of time. You pretty much just have automated infinite money. Normally, I get it mid game, and unfortunately, I'm usually not farming level 10 by that point, so I invest a lot of money into the animals and build up all the goods, and when I do get the artisan perk, I sell all my stuff at once because it's just so much more money, and I can usually sustain myself just from farming and other artisan goods like whining and jarring. So there are usually two different stages of the game I use mining to make money. The first one is early game, because when you are mining and you get a ton of random gemstones like earth crystals, quartz, etc. Maybe not quartz, quartz isn't a great example, but stuff like that, you can sell it for a pretty decent amount of money. You do of course want to save at least two, one just in case you have it lying around, and the other one so you can donate it to the museum, but other than that, it's just free money. I normally use this boost of money in spring to buy myself a lot more crops because it does give me a decent bit of money, and if you do get a diamond, it is incredible money early game because that's like 7 strawberry seeds or a ton of potato seeds. And then mid game, I pretty much ignore mining for money because there are better things I can do, but late game, when I want money fast and don't have to wait for stuff to process or grow, I go mining in skull caverns to make some money because the iridium, if I can do profitable runs as in not use a ton of slingshot ammo, staircases, etc., I can collect large amounts of iridium over time and then smelt it all up, switch my perk to the blacksmith perfection, which boosts the sell price by 50%, and then do bulk sells and make like a million gold at a time, because you can get a lot of iridium pretty easily if you do know how skull caverns work. I'm going to be doing a guide on skull caverns soon, so keep an eye out for that. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. This is an early game method. I sometimes do it late game, but generally just for fun, not really if I really need money. And this is fishing. So a lot of people sleep on fishing in the first year, and I kind of understand that. It can be a little bit difficult to get the hang of straight off the bat, but once you do, it is amazing. And also, one thing to keep in mind, if you're bad at fishing now, just keep powering through it, because at levels 4 and level 8, you will actually get a boost in how big your fishing bar is, and if you're still struggling, you can use food to increase the size of your bobber further. The reason fishing is so good is because it's 1, energy positive. You catch enough generally algae and fish you can eat that you're leveling up your skill, making money, and you don't have to eat a bunch of food doing it. And it's also just good amounts of money because you can catch it really quickly, you don't really have to do a lot of work, and it's kind of idle work. You don't really have to be paying attention a ton. I normally do this early game and then use all the money on potatoes, then turn that potato money into strawberry money, then turn that strawberry money into backpack money, and then spend that money on crops in summer. So overall, never sleep on fishing. It is insanely powerful, and if you're not getting a hang of it, just go ahead and practice. There are some mods out there that can help you practice fishing, so use those for a while. Or if you really want to be one of those people, you can download like an auto fishing mod, but I'd really recommend just getting the hang of the fishing mechanic itself, because it's a lot more fun than just automatically catching every fish. This is probably my biggest moneymaker early game and late game, and that's just planting crops. Planting crops is one of the most self-explanatory things in Stardew Valley. I mean, come on. It's a farming game. What else are you gonna do besides farming? But when you combine this method with like artisan goods and stuff like that, it becomes even more powerful. But early game, I generally do a potato harvest, a second potato harvest if I have time, strawberries, and then I just go from there. That's pretty much my method. I make like 95% of my mid to late game money via crops, and probably a 50% fishing, 50% crops early game. And that's it. If you want to learn about some mistakes I made in my time playing Stardew Valley, click on the video on the screen now so you can avoid them.